One girl, one dog, one chance to be heard. There are some stories you wish were fiction. This is not one of them. On a spring afternoon, in a neighborhood where front lawns bloom and laughter echoes after school, 5-year-old Mira Solis vanished for exactly 6 minutes. 6 minutes. That's all it took to shatter her world and silence her voice. She was found, trembling behind a hedge, her eyes wide with a terror she couldn't explain. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. And she never did again, until she met him. A retired police canine named Kyros, scarred, broken, and considered unfit for service until one little girl reached for his leash. What followed was not just a recovery. It was a fight for justice, a courtroom showdown, and the rewriting of laws across the nation. This is a story about trauma, survival, and the extraordinary bond between a girl who lost her words and a dog who never needed them. The air smelled of sun-warmed grass and distant lilacs. Spring had finally pushed winter out of the yard, and 5-year-old Mira Solis danced in it like a butterfly reborn. Her laughter rang like wind chimes, rising and falling with each skip, twirl, and tiny stumble across the patchwork of green lawn and yellow dandelions. Behind her, a white picket fence framed the garden in safe, familiar boundaries. Beyond it, the quiet suburb of Clearwater Ridge lay half asleep, lulled by a Tuesday afternoon too calm to suspect what waited beneath. Camila Solis stood on the porch, phone pressed to her ear, absently watching her daughter from behind sunglasses. She smiled without quite realizing it, grateful for once to see Mira happy again after a long winter marked by colds, nightmares, and school avoidance. Maybe the worst was behind them. Her sister's voice crackled over the line, chatting about weekend plans and the cake recipe that had gone wrong again. Camila tilted her head, chuckling, and turned just slightly to step back inside, just for a moment. The door clicked shut. 4 minutes passed. When she returned, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel and still half laughing, the smile fell from her lips before the screen door could close behind her. Mira was no longer running. She stood near the edge of the garden, her small frame shadowed by the tall figure of a man clean-cut, in a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. A black SUV idled a few feet away on the side of the road. The man crouched slightly, one hand resting on his knee as if he were speaking to a child in a park. He was smiling. So was Mira. But something was wrong with her smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Camila froze, mind blank, heart already racing. Then she dropped the towel, stepped forward onto the porch, and called out, sharp and high, "Mira!" The sound cut the air like a whip. The man's head snapped toward her. His expression shifted, not startled, not afraid, calculating. A flicker of recognition passed through his eyes, and then it was gone. In one motion, he stood, reached toward Mira's arm, and Mira flinched. "Mira!" This time it was a scream. Camila flew down the steps, her shoes barely touching the ground, but she wasn't alone. 2 houses down, Mrs. Aguilar, 73 years old and walking her terrier, had already seen the exchange. Her voice, usually gentle, rose to a raw yell that startled birds from the trees. "Hey! Hey, you! Get away from that girl!" The man didn't hesitate. He didn't push Mira. He didn't shout. He just turned on his heel, walked quickly to the SUV, and stepped inside. The vehicle sped off before Camila could even reach the gate, tires screeching around the curve at the end of the street, leaving behind nothing but the ghost of burned rubber and a little girl standing frozen in the sun. Camila fell to her knees in front of her daughter, heart pounding so hard she could taste metal. "Baby, are you hurt? Mira, look at me. Are you okay?" Mira didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't blink. She stared at the spot where the SUV had disappeared, her hand half raised, as if still caught mid-wave or mid-reach. "Mira," Camilla whispered, pulling her into a tight embrace, trembling. "It's okay. You're safe. I'm here. I've got you." But Mira didn't move. Her small body was rigid, cold despite the warmth of the day. She clung only to silence, and she wouldn't let go. That night, the house was filled with people, neighbors, officers, and voices too loud for a kitchen that had only hours before smelled of soup and lemon. Detective Ramon Hale knelt on the floor near Mira's room, holding up a small notebook and a crayon. Mira sat on her bed, hugging a stuffed rabbit so tight its seams strained. "Can you draw the car for me, Mira?" he asked gently. "Any part of it. A window, a door, anything you remember." Mira didn't move. Not even when her father Lucas entered the room and placed a hand on her shoulder, not even when Camilla whispered, "Please, baby." The crayons lay untouched. The silence pressed down like snow on a fragile roof. Later that night, long after everyone had left and the porch light still burned in vain against the dark, Camilla sat on the edge of the bed beside Lucas, staring into the hallway where Mira's door was cracked open. "She hasn't said a word," Camilla whispered. "Not one." Lucas rubbed the back of his neck, guilt written deep in his posture. "She will. She just needs time. She's 5, Luke. She was talking to that man. Then she wasn't. Something in her just shut off." Lucas swallowed hard, but didn't speak. From the hallway a sound broke the quiet, a scream. Piercing, raw, then choking sobs. Camilla ran. Mira was thrashing in bed, eyes wide but not seeing, the stuffed rabbit on the floor. Her fingers clawed at the sheets. Camilla gathered her in her arms, rocking, whispering nonsense, kisses, prayers. Lucas stood at the door, helpless. Outside, the wind picked up through the garden, scattering petals across the grass where a child's laughter had once danced just hours ago. And within the stillness of a broken home, a mother held her daughter through the night and wondered if she would ever hear her voice again. He hadn't touched her. Not at first. He didn't need to, not with that voice. It was soft, the kind that made you lean closer without realizing. He'd crouched on the edge of the sidewalk just beyond the white gate, where the bricks curved in like a smile, and spoke to Mira as if she were someone he already knew, like a grown-up cousin, a friend of her dad's, someone who'd been there before, just maybe when she wasn't looking. And Mira, barefoot in the grass with butterfly clips in her hair, paused when she first saw him, just a stranger in a clean shirt. But he smiled like people do in cartoons, eyes kind, tone gentle, no alarm bells, no danger signs, just a warm, ordinary moment. He didn't even ask her name. He asked about bunnies. "You ever seen a baby rabbit up close?" he said, tilting his head as if letting her in on a secret. Not the ones from cartoons, the real tiny ones, soft as cotton. One's hiding in my car right now. She had babies, and they need someone small to take care of them, someone gentle. Mira tilted her head too. He watched her carefully, the way someone might watch a lock before they tried the key. "Would you like to see one?" Her hand moved without thinking, drawing a lazy circle in the air with a stick she'd been holding. Something about the question made her pause. Then she took a step forward. That was when the voice changed, barely. Softer still, lower, intentional. "I could show you how to hold them, but we gotta be quick. They scare easy." Mira's foot crossed the threshold of the open gate, and the sound of the door behind her never came. Camilla still inside. The moment yawned open like a crack in the earth. He rose, slowly, like he didn't want to spook her, reached a hand halfway toward her elbow, and then a sharp, rasping bark, not from a dog, from a human voice, raw with age and urgency. "Hey! Step away from that child!" The man's eyes snapped to the left. Mrs. Aguilar, 73. Standing with her walker, one arthritic hand raised in the air, like it still held power from another lifetime. Everything that followed happened in less than 5 seconds. He grabbed Mira's wrist. She didn't scream. She froze. But the moment the second voice called out, louder, "Younger Camilla's," he let go. The softness vanished. His grip released as quickly as it came, and the smile didn't even have time to die on his face before he turned. Black tires. A car door slammed. The SUV screeched away in a blur of exhaust and sun glare. And Mira, small, startled Mira, was left standing in the grass with her wrist marked faintly red, her hand half clenched in a shape it didn't understand. She turned in time to see her mother running, eyes wild, breath broken, the name Mira tearing through the neighborhood like sirens. But Mira didn't run. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. In the hours that followed, officers came. So did neighbors, everyone asking the same questions. Did you see his face? Did he touch her? Did she say anything? Did you recognize the vehicle? Camilla answered everything. Lucas arrived 15 minutes later, face pale and furious, his hands shaking as he signed the incident report. But Mira just sat. On the porch. On her mother's lap. In her pink overalls with the flower buttons. Not blinking. Not flinching. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Not even when her father knelt and whispered, "Sweetheart, it's okay. He's gone. He didn't get you. You're safe." She stared straight ahead. By 6:00 p.m., Detective Ramon Hale had arrived. He wasn't like the others. He didn't speak right away. He didn't ask for details or wave pictures. Instead, he crouched down to Mira's level, watched her for a long moment, then sat cross-legged on the porch step beside her, notebook still in his back pocket. "I don't like loud people either," he said quietly. No response. "You know, sometimes people don't believe you unless you shout. But shouting doesn't mean you're right. It just means you're loud." Still nothing. "But there's other ways to speak, you know. Ways without words. Drawings, music, or even just pointing." That made Camilla flinch. Not because it wasn't kind, but because it sounded like hope. Hope hurt. Hale reached slowly into his coat, pulled out a small notepad and a blue crayon. He didn't hand it to Mira. He set it on the ground between them like a peace offering. Then he stood. "I'll come back," he said to the parents. "Tomorrow. She might need rest first." "She hasn't made a sound," Camilla whispered. He nodded. "That's okay. Doesn't mean she won't." That night, Mira didn't eat her dinner. She didn't ask for juice, didn't ask for her favorite song before bed. She just lay there, body curled like a question, eyes wide open. Lucas stayed at the edge of the doorway, silent, watching, wondering how something could be over and still feel like it was just beginning. At 3:17 a.m., Camilla woke to screaming, not her own, Mira's. The first sound she'd made all day, and it was a cry so raw, so high and ragged, it sounded like it had traveled through a tunnel of fire to reach the surface. When Camilla rushed in, Mira was sitting up in bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, gasping like someone drowning. But even then, when her mother held her, stroked her hair, whispered prayers and lullabies, and her name again and again. Not a word, not one, just sobs. Then nothing. And stillness, as if her voice had been taken, hidden away by someone with a soft voice and a black SUV, and she didn't know where to find it anymore. They told her she was safe now. They told her the man was gone, the gate was locked, the neighborhood was quiet again. But Mira Solis didn't believe in quiet anymore. Not since that afternoon. Not since the voice, and the grip, and the silence that followed like a shadow no one else could see. The days blurred. Sunlight stretched across her bedroom floor in golden slants that used to make her giggle. Pancake light, she'd called them. Now she didn't even look. Camila tried everything. Play-Doh, watercolors, music, even pancakes with whipped cream smiles and banana eyes. But Mira didn't smile. She didn't draw. She didn't speak. She didn't eat more than 3 bites at a time. Her lips stayed closed like a door that had been locked from the inside. At night, she tossed and turned. Sometimes, she'd start to cry in her sleep, a high whimper that made Camila bolt upright in the dark. Other times, the cries weren't cries at all, but sharp, guttural screams that broke through the drywall and left the entire street in stunned silence. "She's not the same," Camila whispered one evening, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long gone cold. Lucas sat across the kitchen table, eyes hollowed out from lack of sleep. He didn't respond. "She won't let me touch her shoulders anymore," Camila added, voice cracking. "Not even when I brush her hair." Lucas finally looked up. "She's afraid, Camila. And we weren't there." His words tasted like guilt. They sounded like blame. But they were meant for himself. He tried to fix it. Of course he did. Lucas rearranged his work schedule, started making school lunches Mira wouldn't eat, built her a new shelf for her stuffed animals. He repaired the broken hinge on her jewelry box, even though she hadn't opened it in a week. He became a storm of action, quiet, desperate action. But at night, when he sat in the hallway outside her door, he listened to the rustle of sheets, to the cry that didn't come, and sometimes to the soft, haunting echo of Mira talking in her sleep. Words like, "No," and "Don't take them." And once the one that nearly made him vomit, "Please don't hurt my mommy." On the 7th day, the school counselor called, and on the 8th, a clinical psychologist. By the 9th, Mira was referred to a trauma specialist, Dr. Eleanor Voss. They drove 40 minutes across town for the appointment. Mira didn't speak during the entire ride. She stared out the window like someone watching a movie they'd already seen and didn't want to see again. Dr. Voss had short silver hair and kind eyes, but no fake smiles. No, "Hi, Mira, let's play," like everyone else. She just knelt down and said, "You don't have to say anything today. You don't even have to look at me." Mira didn't. She stared at the corner of the room, at a small basket of crumpled paper cranes someone else had made. "Trauma steals the voice," Dr. Voss explained quietly to the parents in the next room. Sometimes literally. It's called selective mutism. Not uncommon in children after a high-threat experience, especially when they feel no one heard them in time. Lucas looked down. "She'll speak again," Voss added. "But not because you tell her to. She'll need a bridge." Camila asked what kind of bridge. Voss opened a file. "In some cases, a therapy animal. We've seen extraordinary progress with nonverbal children connecting through canine-assisted recovery." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "You mean like a dog?" "A dog who listens without asking questions." who doesn't look away when she cries, who knows fear by scent. She closed the folder. There's one I'd like her to meet. That night, Mira sat in her bed, knees tucked under her chin, the blanket pulled tight around her like armor. The hallway light glowed behind her father's silhouette as he leaned against the doorframe. "You know," he said softly, "when I was little, I used to be afraid of trees at night. I thought they were monsters. But one day, Grandpa gave me a flashlight, and he said, 'Sometimes light isn't something you shine. Sometimes it's someone you stand next to.'" No response. "Mira," he whispered. She didn't turn her head, but she reached for her stuffed rabbit and clutched it against her chest until her arms shook. Lucas returned to the kitchen and sat down across from Camilla. His hands trembled. "I should have known," he said, barely audible. "She was right there, right in the yard. I shouldn't have been at work. I should have—" "Stop," Camilla whispered, laying a hand on his. "You didn't let this happen." "She trusted me to protect her," he said. "And I didn't." Camilla didn't have an answer, just silence. And outside, a wind picked up across the yard, the kind of wind that slips through cracks in fences and under doors, the kind that sounds like whispering. 1 week after the incident, Mira had still not spoken a word. But her eyes had changed. They were older now, not in years, but in weight. Camilla noticed it when brushing a strand of hair away from Mira's face during a morning she didn't even remember waking up for. A flicker in the gaze, a flinch, and something deeper like Mira was always listening for footsteps, even in silence. That evening, Dr. Voss called. "I have someone I'd like her to meet," she said again. "His name is Kyros. He's not a puppy, not soft and goofy, but he's been through things too. And sometimes children sense that." Lucas looked at Camilla. Camilla looked at Mira, curled on the couch with the TV playing something she wasn't watching. And Camilla finally said, "Let's try." Some dogs are born into purpose. Others earn it through pain. Kyros had known both. He had once been called Titan Unit Echo 7, a canine trained for urban reconnaissance, crowd threat detection, and child recovery. His nose could trace a scent across 4 blocks. His bite could crack bone clean. But it was his eyes, amber gold and always 2 seconds ahead, that made handlers trust him even in the dark. Until that alley. Until the flash. Until the knife. It had been raining that night. The suspect had a girl, maybe 8 years old, clutched to his chest like a shield as he ran into a narrow corridor behind a hardware store. Officer James Martinez, Kyros's handler, had shouted once, twice, but the man didn't stop. So Kyros was released, muscle and instinct exploding down the alley. He made contact first, but he never made it back. A blade meant for Martinez sank deep into Kyros's side. The suspect shoved him hard, too hard, and Kyros crashed through a loose board at the end of the alley, plunging into a ravine below. It was the last time anyone from the force saw him conscious. They pulled him from the rocks hours later, barely breathing, ribs cracked, his flank bleeding so fast the vet didn't think he'd survive the ride. The department had a policy. Dogs injured beyond operational use were either retired to adoption or euthanized if medical costs outweighed reasonable recovery expectations. The term echoed in every document filed that week, reasonable expectations. But there had been nothing reasonable about the way Kyros had lunged to take a blade for a child not his. and there was nothing reasonable about what came next. He woke up somewhere quiet. The lights were soft. The smells were foreign, but not threatening. He couldn't stand at first, only blink and twitch his ears toward voices he didn't recognize. She was there. Not an officer, not a vet, not afraid. A woman with silver-streaked hair, warm hands, and a tone that was never rushed. She didn't call him Titan. She called him Kyros, ancient Greek. Supreme power. She never gave a command, just waited. And when he finally stood, staggering, slow but upright, she knelt and whispered, "Welcome back, soldier." Dr. Elena Voss didn't believe in discarding the broken. She believed in repurposing the wounded. In every scar she saw a message unspoken, in every tremble a question waiting to be heard. Kyros had plenty. He flinched at the sight of trash bags, refused to enter small rooms, wouldn't let anyone near his left side, not even Voss. He paced in circles for hours, his breathing erratic when the wind hit just right. But she didn't medicate him into stillness. She taught him how to find calm in chaos again. It took months. Rehabilitation came in layers. First, the body-gentle physiotherapy, short walks, warm compresses for the muscle knots that never healed right. Then came sensory reconditioning, scents, sounds, textures. Voss would lay out objects on the ground, toys, shoes, jackets, some soaked with the scent of sadness, others joy, fear, trauma. Kyros began to respond, not like a police dog, like something more sensitive, more attuned. Voss had seen it only once before, in a retired bomb sniffer turned hospice therapy dog. A rare, intuitive capacity to detect changes in cortisol, breathing, posture, not just external threats, but internal storms. Kyros didn't bark. He observed. He waited. And when someone trembled, he moved closer, not to alarm, to anchor. 2 children came to the facility that winter. One had night terrors after a fire. The other had stopped eating after witnessing a shooting at school. Kyros sat between them like a statue, didn't move, didn't nudge, just watched. And when the girl began to cry, low and quietly into her hands, Kyros rose and placed his paw gently, precisely on her foot. She looked up, and for the first time in weeks, she reached back. That was the moment Voss knew. Kyros wasn't a retired dog. He was a redeployed soul. Now, over a year later, Voss stood outside his kennel, watching him watch the trees. His posture was calm, but alert, ears forward, breath steady. He wasn't healed, but he was ready. Camila Solis would arrive in 2 days with her daughter, a 5-year-old who hadn't spoken in 10. "She's not going to smile," Voss told Kyros softly. "Not right away. She's not going to pet you or laugh or lie down next to you like the others." Kyros didn't blink. "But she needs something quiet, something still, and someone who won't leave." The wind picked up across the therapy yard. Leaves rustled. Somewhere a gate creaked. Kyros didn't flinch. Instead, he lay down, tail tucked, eyes still fixed on the trees, as if to say, "I can wait." The room was warm, softly lit, and smelled faintly of cedarwood and chamomile. There were no white coats, no ticking clocks, no sterile walls. Just quiet, measured, intentional quiet. Mira stood near the threshold, one hand clutching the hem of her mother's sweater, the other wrapped tightly around her worn, stuffed rabbit. She said nothing. Hadn't for 13 days. Her eyes scanned the space with the caution of someone who had been taught brutally that not everything safe stays safe. Dr. Elena Voss didn't approach. She didn't kneel. She didn't say Mira's name. She simply nodded and stepped to the side, allowing the little girl to see what waited at the far end of the room. Kyros. The German shepherd sat calmly beside a low platform, his posture patient but alert. No leash, no handler, just him, still, steady, scarred. Mira's eyes locked onto his the way some people stare into fire, not because it's dangerous, but because they don't know what it will reveal. Camilla knelt down, whispering something Mira didn't hear or didn't process. Lucas stood further back, uncertain if he should step forward or disappear entirely. "Mira," Dr. Voss said gently, speaking for the first time. "That's Kyros. He doesn't talk either." It wasn't quite true, of course. Kyros had once known over 40 commands, could read hand signals from across a crowd, and had saved lives under sniper fire. But for Mira, for this moment, it was true enough. Mira blinked. Once, Kyros didn't move. Dr. Voss continued, "You don't have to go to him. You can just sit, or stand, or draw, or wait." Mira didn't sit. She didn't speak. She just watched. For 15 minutes. And Kyros never looked away. The seconds stretched. At one point, Camilla stepped forward to suggest they try again tomorrow. But Voss quietly shook her head. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the work." Then Mira moved, just one step, then another. Her stuffed rabbit fell from her arm to the floor with a soft thump, but she didn't reach for it. Her eyes stayed locked on Kyros. The dog didn't rise, didn't wag his tail, didn't flinch. And then she was there, standing within arm's reach of him. They faced each other, girl and dog, silence and strength. Kyros slowly turned his head, offering his left side. There, along his flank, was a long, pale scar. It curved slightly under the fur, healed but not hidden, a mark of where something had tried to end him. Mira didn't ask what it was. She just reached out, so slowly, it was barely a gesture, and placed her small, trembling fingers along the length of the scar. Kyros didn't move. Then, after a pause so fragile it might have shattered, he leaned in. Just a few inches, just enough for his forehead to brush lightly against her chest, right where her heart was beating too fast. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But she did breathe. Deeply. For the first time in days. Camilla's hand flew to her mouth. Lucas exhaled like he'd been holding it in since the day of the incident. Voss stayed still, watching, noting, waiting for the break in the pattern. And then it happened. Mira sat down, cross-legged, right beside him. Kyros adjusted, eased into a relaxed position, with his front paws stretched forward, his side resting against her knees. Not claiming, not protecting, just being. Mira reached for his ear, touched it gently, then ran her fingers once more across the scar. And then she closed her eyes. Not from fear, but because for the first time she could. Minutes passed. Neither moved. Outside, a breeze stirred the wind chimes hanging from the veranda. Light flickered across the wall. Dr. Voss stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. "She doesn't need to talk today," she said to the parents. "She just needed to be heard." Camilla's eyes welled. Lucas gripped the back of the chair until his knuckles went white. "But how did he know?" Camilla whispered. "How did he know?" Voss smiled softly. "Because he remembers what it's like not to be okay, and have no words to explain it." When the session ended, Mira didn't want to stand. Kyros didn't move until she gently brushed her hand along his neck, as if giving him permission. She didn't say goodbye, but when they opened the door to leave, she turned just once and raised her hand in the air, a quiet gesture. And Kyros, without command, stood and mirrored it with a single tilt of his head, as if saying, "I saw you." That night, Mira placed her stuffed rabbit at the end of her bed, and in a voice no one heard but her, she whispered, "He didn't bark. He just listened." It started with a pencil, a short, chewed-up one with a worn eraser and no sharpener in sight. Mira found it in the bottom of her backpack the morning after meeting Kyros. No one told her to use it. No one asked her to draw, but she did. A single line at first, crooked, uncertain, drawn across a crumpled page torn from an old sketch pad. Camilla watched from the kitchen, the dish towel in her hands forgotten as Mira sat at the table, hunched and focused. Her small hand moved like it remembered something her voice had long forgotten. By the time the sun rose higher, the page held two shapes, one unmistakably canine, large, upright, quiet, the other taller, faceless, shaded, dark. Camilla didn't ask questions. She only folded the towel tighter. Kyros returned to the house 2 days later, this time not as a visitor, but as part of a temporary in-home therapy program initiated by Dr. Voss. He was to stay with the Solis family 3 afternoons a week. No commands, no structured play, just presence. He arrived without fanfare. Mira had been waiting at the front door for almost an hour before the car even pulled up. She didn't say a word when he stepped inside. She simply turned, walked toward the living room, and left space for him beside her on the rug. Kyros took it. By the end of the first week, Mira had drawn 7 pictures. One of Kyros lying in the grass, one of the scar across his side, one of herself tiny and stick-figured with a single tear falling. In all of them, Kyros was always watching her, never barking, never chasing, just there. And in every corner of each page, shaded in gray or black crayon, was a figure, always the same, long coat, no face, a man half lost in shadow. Camilla collected the drawings gently, like leaves fallen out of season. She showed them to Dr. Voss, who nodded without surprise. "She's talking," the doctor said softly. "You just have to know where to listen." One night, Mira screamed. It was the kind of scream that didn't build. It exploded from the center of her chest like something breaking loose. Lucas was up before the second cry. Camilla not far behind. They found her tangled in blankets, kicking at the air, hands gripping the pillow as if she were drowning in it. But Kyros was faster. He had been sleeping on the floor at the foot of her bed, his usual place since the visits began. At the first sound he rose, calm, precise, no barking, no growling. He approached slowly, then placed his head gently against her side. Mira flinched at first, but then something shifted. Her screams turned to sobs. Her sobs slowed to hiccups, and then to silence. One hand reached down blindly and found Kyros's ear. She didn't say a word, but she didn't need to. By the second week, Mira began humming, just fragments, soft, tuneless, and only when she was with Kyros, but it filled the house like the scent of baking bread. Lucas caught it one morning while passing her room. He didn't dare open the door. He stood in the hallway for 7 minutes, not breathing, afraid the moment would vanish if it noticed him. That afternoon, Camilla found a new drawing on the table. A meadow. A girl. A dog. The girl was smiling. The man was gone. It was the first drawing without shadows. Sometimes Kyros would alert before the nightmares even began. He'd stir at dusk, ears flicking toward Mira's room. Then he'd rise, slow and quiet, and nudge open her door. Camilla would find them there, Mira already asleep, Kyros lying across the floor, his body angled toward the window as if watching for someone no one else could see. And when she dreamed of being taken again of the black SUV, the man's voice, the tightening grip Kyros, would wake her not with sound, but with presence. He'd place his chin on the mattress, or touch her knee with his paw. It was always enough. Mira didn't speak, but the house began to breathe again. Camilla put away the sleepless nightlight in Mira's room. Lucas stopped checking the front gate every hour. The silence didn't feel like a void anymore. It felt like a language in translation, slow, deliberate, sacred. Kyros didn't demand anything. He only offered what he had: stillness, warmth, witness, and Mira, in return, began to trust the world in inches. On the 15th day, she took a piece of paper and wrote 3 words in big, wobbly letters. "He listens first." Camilla found the note taped to Kyros's crate. She stared at it for a long time, then sat on the floor beside it and cried for the first time, not out of fear, but out of relief so sudden it hurt. That night, as the wind moved through the trees outside Mira's window, Kyros raised his head from where he lay curled at her feet. His ears twitched. He listened for the quiet, but there was no scream, just the sound of Mira's breath, slow and even, and the soft scrape of pencil on paper, as she drew the story she hadn't told yet, one line at a time. The knock on the door wasn't loud, but it wasn't gentle either. It was the kind of knock that said, "I don't have time to waste, but I know I need to be kind." Lucas opened it halfway, shoulders stiff. Camilla stood behind him, drying her hands on a dish towel that had been clean until the phone rang 15 minutes earlier. "Detective Ramon Hale," the man introduced himself, holding out a leather badge wallet. "Clearwater PD. You were expecting me?" Lucas stepped back. "Yeah, come in." Hale walked in like someone who knew what grief looked like and tried not to wear it like a badge. He was in his 50s, tall, built like a man who used to box and still might. His blazer was worn thin at the elbows, his tie askew, and the lines around his eyes told a story his voice didn't. He nodded toward the coffee table where a dozen of Mira's drawings were spread out, some of them now carefully laminated in thin protective sleeves. The most recent one, done in dark charcoal, showed a large black vehicle and a man without a face. "She still hasn't spoken?" Hale asked quietly. Camilla shook her head. "Not words, but she draws and hums, and she screams at night," Lucas finished. "Almost every night." Hale nodded. He pulled out a small notebook and sat in the corner chair, the one still dented from where Kyros usually curled up in the afternoons. He didn't take out a recorder. He didn't push papers across the table. Instead, he said, "I need to tell you something, and it won't be easy to hear." Camilla's hands gripped the edge of the couch cushion. "We've had 4 child disappearances in 3 neighboring counties over the last year and a half. Each case involved a child under the age of 10. Each was reported missing within 200 miles of here. And in each case, the last known point of contact was inconclusive." Lucas's voice dropped. "What are you saying?" I'm saying, Hale continued, your daughter is the first child who made it back. The silence in the room grew heavy, like the house itself held its breath. Camilla turned slightly, instinctively glancing toward the hallway, toward Mira's room, where the faint scratching of crayon on paper could still be heard. She got away, Hale said. And that means whoever's behind this is either getting reckless or panicked. Lucas leaned forward. But she didn't see his face. Not clearly, she can't identify him. She saw enough, Hale said, pulling a folded sheet from his inner jacket pocket. We've got a composite sketch based on the details your neighbor gave, the one who screamed, Mrs. Aguilar. And the landscapers down the street gave partial confirmation. He placed the sketch on the table. A man in his 40s, clean-shaven, neutral expression. The kind of face that could stand in line behind you at a gas station and disappear from memory 10 seconds later. Hale added another paper, a partial license plate. She caught the first 4 characters, 3FZ9. The vehicle is a black SUV, likely a Chevy Suburban or a similar build. Lucas exhaled through his nose. That's not much to go on. No, Hale admitted. But it's more than we had yesterday. Camilla's voice was barely above a whisper. What about the other children? He hesitated, then softly. They're still missing. From the hallway came the sound of claws tapping lightly on wood. A moment later, Kyros stepped into the room. He didn't bark. He didn't look alarmed. He just came forward and settled beside the coffee table, positioning himself directly in front of the sketch. Hale glanced at the dog, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. That the therapy dog? He asked. Lucas nodded. Kyros. Hale didn't move for a moment. Then, as if on instinct, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notepad. Kyros didn't flinch, but he did watch. Interesting, Hale murmured. Some dogs don't just detect trauma. They track it. Camilla's voice cracked. He watches Mira while she sleeps. He knows when she's about to cry, before she does. Hale nodded slowly. Then he's not just therapy. He's witness. A soft knock broke the moment. Mira stood in the hallway, barefoot, clutching a sketchbook in both hands. Her eyes flicked to Kyros, then to the man she hadn't seen before. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She just walked forward and placed the sketchbook on the coffee table right on top of the composite sketch. Then she stepped back and knelt beside Kyros, placing one hand gently on his back. The page she left behind showed a black SUV and a man in a blue shirt with rolled-up sleeves. But this time, his face wasn't blank. It was shaded in shadows. Yes, but 2 eyes stared out from the drawing. Eyes the same shape and distance as the ones in the composite sketch beneath it. And in the top right corner of the page, in faint pencil, she had written, "He said they're in the car." No one spoke. No one breathed. Hale reached for the page with fingers that had handled too many files, too many autopsy photos, too many dashed hopes. But this one was still alive. He turned to Mira. She didn't look away. He lowered his voice to a register used only for sacred things. "Thank you," he said. Mira blinked once, then leaned into Kyros. And Kyros, as if he'd heard every word exchanged in that room, lowered his head and gently covered her hand with his paw. His house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in River Glen, one of those neighborhoods where lawn edges are trimmed to regulation, precision, and mailboxes match like they're part of a suburban uniform. The kind of place where people wave but don't ask questions, where nothing ever happens. Until now. Dorian Pike, answered the door in a white polo shirt, hair neatly combed, shoes spotless. He blinked at the badge with polite confusion. "Is something wrong, officer?" Detective Hale didn't blink back. "Mind if we come in, Mr. Pike?" There was a pause. Brief, controlled. Then, "Of course." The living room looked like it had been designed by an algorithm. Beige couch, framed abstract prints, a bookcase lined with titles that didn't have creases in their spines. It smelled faintly of lemon oil and filtered air. Hale stepped through slowly, eyes scanning. Behind him, forensic specialist Jordan closed the door quietly. "No pets?" Jordan asked casually, glancing toward the floorboards. Pike gave a small, practiced laugh. "I'm allergic. Just me here. I work from home mostly." Hale nodded, his expression unreadable. "Mind if we take a quick look around?" Pike hesitated, but not too long. "I'd prefer you had a warrant." "Of course. We're not here to make you uncomfortable." Hale held up a folded paper. "This is just a preliminary interview, but if you change your mind, we can make arrangements." There was a flicker, just a fraction of irritation in Pike's eyes. But he smiled again, stepping back. "Fine. You can look. I've got nothing to hide." The garage was what did it. Too clean. Spotless, in fact. The concrete floor had been recently pressure washed, but faint chemical smell still clung to the air. The workbench gleamed. No grease, no dust. Not a single out-of-place item. "No one keeps a garage like this," Jordan muttered under his breath, crouching near the baseboards. Hale opened a cabinet. Empty. Not even a single screwdriver. "Mind if I ask what you usually work on out here?" he said aloud. Pike, standing near the doorway with arms folded too neatly, answered, "Just basic tech repairs. I don't do much anymore. Most of it's remote support." Hale turned to him. "You said you're allergic to animals?" "Yeah. Severe dander reactions. Why?" Jordan stood, glancing at the evidence bag in his glove. Inside, 2 long hairs, coarse, brown-black. "Because you've got dog hair in your air vent." Back inside, Pike's demeanor shifted just slightly. His voice stayed even, but his tone thinned. "I had a friend over last week. He has a dog. It probably shed." Hale raised an eyebrow. "What breed?" "I don't know. One of those retrievers, I think." "Why does it matter?" Hale didn't answer. Not directly. "We're following up on a case," he said, folding the evidence bag closed. "Several cases, actually. Are you accusing me of something?" "Should we be?" A long pause. Then Pike smiled again. Flat. Practiced. "I'd like you to leave now." Hale nodded, polite. "Of course. For now." Later that night, Hale sat alone in his office, staring at a wall of photos and timelines. The partial plate, 3FZ9, matched a vehicle registered to Dorian Pike 2 years ago. It had been sold, transferred, re-registered under a new name. But the transaction hadn't gone through an official dealership. Private sale, no paperwork trail, and the name listed as buyer. A dead end, fake ID, burned phone number. A search warrant took 36 hours to obtain. The second visit was less polite. Forensics combed the garage, found more dog hair, 3 different breeds. No crates, no bowls, no beds, and not a single sign of current ownership. The backyard was lined with hedges, but behind them, a small square of disturbed earth, freshly packed. Too fresh. They dug, but found nothing. No remains, no bones, no obvious evidence, just dirt. and silence. Inside the house, Hale opened Pike's laptop with a warrant in hand. A search history clean enough to make him uncomfortable. No searches about child behavior, no articles about local news, no queries about therapy dogs, trauma recovery, or missing persons. Just perfectly scrubbed, bland, digital nothing. Almost like someone had prepped for a visit. Almost like someone knew what it meant to leave no trace. Camilla sat across from Hale the next morning, her hand shaking as she passed over Mira's latest drawing. Another SUV, this time parked behind hedges. The windows were dark. The figure beside it wore gloves, and next to him, just barely visible, was a child's shoe lying in the grass. "Mira drew this yesterday," Camilla whispered. "Before the search. Before she even knew what a hedge was." Hale stared at the page, his jaw tightening. She remembers more than we realize. Back at headquarters, the profile started to build. Dorian Pike, age 44, independent IT contractor, formerly employed by a charter school network, left 2 years ago after a dispute no one could clearly explain. No spouse, no children, no criminal record, not even a speeding ticket. But to Hale's trained eye, that wasn't clean. That was controlled. That was curated. And it meant only one thing. Dorian Pike had done this before. He was careful, disciplined, and smart enough to make sure nothing pointed directly to him. Yet, they'd hoped it wouldn't come to this, that somehow the sketch would be enough. That the soil samples and the dog hairs and the evasive answers would be enough, that the dark SUV described in 4 separate cases might finally shout louder than a frightened little girl ever needed to. But the evidence wasn't singing, it was whispering. And Dorian Pike, clean, polite, precisely forgettable, was slipping between the cracks like water. Which meant Mira, whether she was ready or not, might be the only voice that could hold him in place, even if she never spoke a word. The meeting took place in a small, windowless room inside the Clearwater Justice Building. Pale blue walls, 2 chairs, 1 wooden table, a glass of untouched water in front of Camilla. Prosecutor Elise Navarro sat across from them, a folder open but not touched. Her blazer was navy, her eyes sharper than most people expected from someone who smiled so gently. "Mira is the only one who saw his face," she said softly. "The only one who looked him in the eyes and walked away." Lucas shifted in his seat. "She's just 5. Navarro nodded. "And she's brave. I'm not asking you to decide today, but we're running out of options." Camilla looked down at her hands. "She still hasn't spoken. Not to us. Not even a word." "Words aren't the only way to testify," Navarro said. "We can structure the courtroom so she's never alone up there. We've used nonverbal indicators before. Yes, no cards. Pointing charts. The judge is sympathetic." Lucas's voice cracked. "And what happens if she freezes?" "Then she freezes," Navarro replied. "And we stop. No pressure, no forcing. But I can't build a case around empty garage floors and secondhand witness memory, not against someone this intentional." There was a silence. Then Navarro leaned forward. Her voice softened. "There's one thing that might make it possible. One thing she might trust." Camilla already knew what she was going to say. "Kyros." The drive home was silent. Mira sat in the back seat, her crayon tucked behind her ear, her sketch pad open but untouched. Kyros lay on the seat beside her, head resting on his paws, eyes watching the road through the window like he already knew where this story was headed. Camilla watched them through the rearview mirror. Mira had one finger threaded loosely through Kyros's collar, not holding, just connecting. Lucas stared out the window, his jaw clenched, like he wanted to punch a hole through the sky just to make something feel. "Do you think she can do it?" he asked finally. Camilla didn't answer for a long time. "I think she already is." That evening, Dr. Voss met them at the house. She didn't bring charts. She didn't bring long words. She brought a mock courtroom model wooden panels, a small desk, chairs, a miniature version of what Mira might face. And she brought one other thing, a copy of Kyros's training record, not from his K9 years, but from the therapy program. "This," Voss said, "is not about turning her into a witness. It's about giving her a place to say, 'I'm not afraid of him anymore.'" Lucas rubbed his forehead. "But what if she is?" Voss looked him in the eye. "Then Kyros will be there to remind her that being afraid doesn't mean being alone." Later that night, Mira set her plate in the sink without being asked. Then she walked to the living room rug where Kyros was already lying down. She sat beside him, cross-legged. From her back pocket she pulled a folded sheet of paper, a new drawing. It showed a courtroom, not detailed but clear enough. A desk, a judge's bench, a man in a chair, and next to that man, a little girl with a dog beside her, his scar drawn in silver crayon, and written carefully above the image, in big, uneven letters, "He won't be there alone, so I won't be either." Camilla took the paper and held it against her chest. Lucas turned away, pretending to adjust the lamp. Kyros, without fanfare, rested his head on Mira's knee. And Mira looked up, not at her parents, but straight at the silence that had held her hostage for 16 days, and blinked. Once. Firm. The next morning, the prosecutor's phone buzzed. A text. Just a photo. Mira's drawing. And below it, 3 words. "We're ready." The courtroom was quiet, but not the respectful kind of quiet. It was taut, strained, like the breath before a thunderclap. At the front of the chamber, Judge Elias Warren sat with his fingers steepled, eyes fixed on the motion before him. Behind him, the state seal gleamed dully in the soft light, casting long shadows across the room that somehow felt heavier today. Across the aisle, Prosecutor Elise Navarro sat motionless, jaw tight. To her right, Dr. Elena Voss waited with Kyros, seated calmly beside her, poised, quiet, scar visible beneath his collar. His presence didn't fill the room with sound, only meaning, and the defense wanted him gone. Thomas Breyer, lead defense attorney for Dorian Pike, cleared his throat as he rose to address the court. "Your Honor," he began, "this is not a case about emotional comfort. It is a criminal proceeding with high stakes and serious consequences. And while I have every respect for the trauma this child has endured, the presence of a large, visibly scarred German shepherd in a courtroom introduces an emotional variable that prejudices this trial before a word is even spoken." He walked slowly past the jury box, gesturing with controlled conviction. No member of a jury can remain truly impartial while a child sits on the witness stand with a heroic-looking animal beside her. It suggests fear, suggests danger, suggests guilt before the defense has had a chance to respond. Navarro didn't flinch. Judge Warren leaned slightly forward. "Your motion requests the full exclusion of the therapy dog?" "Yes, Your Honor," Breyer replied. "We believe it undermines due process. This is not a support group session, it's a courtroom." Navarro rose slowly. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Your Honor," she said, "the witness is 5 years old. She has been diagnosed with post-traumatic mutism. The child has not spoken a full sentence since the attempted abduction. Her communication is limited to gestures, drawings, and written words." She glanced toward Mira's parents, seated behind her, and then toward Kyros. "The dog is not a symbol. He is a medically supported accommodation trained to detect rising anxiety, prevent full dissociation, and provide grounding for a minor victim of extreme trauma." She let that sink in. This is not emotional influence. It's emotional access. Without him, she may not testify at all. Breyer was already shaking his head before she finished. "With respect, that still introduces emotional bias. A dog with a tragic backstory, scars, a presence trained to comfort. Jurors aren't robots, Your Honor. They're human. And that dog walks in beside the child, the room already leans." Judge Warren turned his gaze toward Voss. "Doctor, is Kyros essential to the child's ability to testify?" Voss stood. Her voice was clinical but compassionate. "She doesn't look at strangers when she's scared," she said. "She doesn't speak when she feels watched. But with Kyros there, her body stays still, her eyes stay forward, her mind remains anchored. She can answer with nods, with gestures, but she needs him to breathe." The courtroom was still. Then Judge Warren asked, "Has this been done before?" Navarro answered immediately. "Yes, Your Honor. In at least 9 other states, therapeutic support animals have been used in child testimony with judge-supervised protocols. No mistrials, no prejudice reversals." Breyer scoffed. "That's not this state." Navarro didn't blink. "Then let us set the precedent." Warren looked down at the motion, then at the defense, then at Kyros. The dog was perfectly still, eyes alert, tail unmoving. He wasn't performing, he wasn't emoting, he was waiting. Warren exhaled slowly, then spoke. "I will allow the presence of the therapy dog during the minor witness's testimony. The court will provide instruction to the jury regarding impartiality and the therapeutic purpose of the animal." Breyer rose again. "Your Honor." But Warren cut him off with a glance. "This court recognizes trauma as real, silence as significant, and safety as a necessity, not a strategy." He tapped his gavel once. Motion denied. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Journalists leaned over railings, shouting questions that no one answered. Mira wasn't there. Neither was Kyros. But the headline already wrote itself. "Therapy dog cleared to appear in landmark child witness testimony." Inside, Camilla clutched her husband's hand so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Lucas didn't speak. He didn't need to. For the first time in weeks, the legal system had bent not in weakness, but in mercy. Later, in the hallway, Voss knelt beside Kyros and whispered softly, "You did good, partner." He didn't react. Not with movement. But his head turned slightly toward the courtroom door. As if listening. As if waiting for the child he hadn't failed yet. Judge Elias Warren sat alone in his chambers long after the court had emptied. The gavel still rested at an angle on his bench, untouched since the hearing. Outside, the world moved in predictable rhythms, horns, footsteps, headlines. Inside, the silence wasn't peaceful. It pulsed. It echoed. He stared at the motion files again, but the words had long since blurred into something weightless. Legal language could define events, it could classify trauma. But it never once brought his daughter home. 15 years. That's how long it had been since Hannah disappeared. 12 years old. Smart, tender-hearted, terrified of thunderstorms. She used to leave sticky notes on the fridge for him before school. Drink water. Wear sunscreen. Don't yell at dumb people. He used to keep them. He still did. She vanished walking home from piano practice, just 3 blocks from their house. A man in a white van. No screams, no prints, no closure. Elias had been a criminal defense attorney back then. Sharp, unrelenting, the kind who won more than he lost and couldn't sleep after either. After Hannah, he never went back to the courtroom. He applied for the bench instead, and he'd been sitting behind one ever since, pretending to believe in systems. He rubbed his eyes, opened the drawer on his left, and took out the old newspaper clipping. The ink was yellowing now, brittle along the folds. Local girls still missing after 72 hours. Hannah's smile in the photo was crooked, just like his. He blinked, and suddenly he was back there again in the precinct, staring at grainy footage, praying for a shoe print, a tire mark, something. But nothing ever came. Until this week. Until a 5-year-old named Mira was nearly taken by a man with no criminal record. Until a scarred German shepherd named Kyros stood between silence and testimony. Until the court became more than law again. It became personal. He pushed away from his desk and walked slowly to the window. The city looked colder at night, honest in its own indifferent way. From his pocket he pulled out a tiny photo creased in the center. Hannah, at age 10. She was holding a balloon animal and looking at something just out of frame, laughing so hard her eyes disappeared into her cheeks. He swallowed hard and set the photo on the sill. The knock was soft. "Come in," he said. It was Navarro. Her expression was quiet, measured. "Apologies for the late visit, Your Honor," she said. "I just wanted to thank you for listening today." Warren didn't look at her. Just nodded once. "She still won't speak?" he asked. "No. But she draws. Sleeps better with the dog nearby. Doesn't wake screaming anymore." He breathed in. "That dog. Kyros. You believe he's the reason she might testify?" Navarro's voice softened. "I don't believe it, sir. I've seen it." Warren turned, then really turned, and looked her in the eye. "Do you know what it's like," he said slowly, "to sit on a bench like this, day after day, and see how often justice has nothing to do with truth?" She didn't answer. So he continued. "My daughter was taken 15 years ago. Her case went cold after 2 weeks. No suspects. No motive. No body." Navarro's breath hitched. "I've lived with the weight of the unspoken ever since. The not knowing. The quiet." He gestured toward the file on Mira's case. "If Kyros is what makes that child's voice heard, I won't be the one who silences her again." Navarro blinked back sudden wetness in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Warren offered a faint, tired smile. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just win." Later that night, long after Navarro had gone, Warren sat back down. He opened the court order file and picked up his pen. His hand paused just before the signature. And in that brief moment, it was like he could feel his daughter's hand on his, steady, small, unafraid. He signed the order. Kyros may remain with Mira during testimony. Then he turned off the lamp, left the chambers, and walked down the courthouse steps into the waiting dark. But tonight, for the first time in 15 years, it didn't feel so empty. The courtroom was empty, but it didn't feel that way to Mira. Its ceilings stretched high like they were holding their breath. The walls were bare except for the flag and the seal, but somehow they still watched. The wooden pews creaked as Dr. Elena Voss guided Mira forward, one step at a time. Kyros padded beside her. No leash tug, no command, just presence, silent, patient presence. Mira's hand clutched the soft leather handle like it was the only thing anchoring her to the floor. Her shoes made no sound on the carpet, but her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She didn't look around. Not at the judge's bench, not at the empty jury box, not at the seat she knew she'd be asked to sit in soon. She only looked at Kyros, and he was looking at her. Elena's voice was calm, soft. She never raised it, not even when Mira froze halfway down the aisle. "You're doing so well, Mira," she said. "We're just walking today. No questions, no one watching. Just you and Kyros and me." Mira didn't speak, but she blinked once, slow, deliberate. That was something. They reached the witness stand. "Would it help," Elena asked, "if Kyros went first?" Mira looked down. Kyros was already sitting, tail curled to the side, body squared off with the edge of the stand like he was guarding her path forward. He didn't move until Mira did. Then, gently, she stepped up beside him. Elena nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's try our first signal." She crouched down beside the bench and pulled out a small laminated card with a drawing of a paw and a red dot beneath it. "Mira," she said, holding it up, "remember what we practiced? If you feel scared or want me to stop, you can touch Kyros's paw and I'll know. That's all you have to do." Mira didn't respond, but she slowly sank to the seat, shoulders drawn tight. Her hand still gripped the leash like it might disappear if she let go. Kyros leaned in, resting his head lightly against her thigh. The leash slackened. Elena moved to the far end of the courtroom and took a seat in the lawyer's chair, careful to keep her body language open, non-threatening. She didn't use legal language, no titles, no formality, just her voice. "Hey, Mira," she began gently. "Remember I said I'd ask something easy today? Let's try it." Pause. "If you see something red in this room, could you nod for me?" Mira didn't move. Elena tried again, this time with a soft smile. "Could you blink twice if you do?" Mira's gaze shifted first to Kyros, then to the exit sign glowing faintly behind Elena's shoulder. 2 slow blinks. Elena exhaled carefully. "Good," she said. "That's really good." Outside the chamber, Camilla and Lucas stood at the small viewing glass, their hands clenched in each other's. Neither spoke. Inside, Elena continued, "Let's say I asked a question and you didn't want to answer. What could you do then?" Mira didn't move. Kyros shifted, nudging her elbow with the side of his muzzle, and then, after what felt like a held breath, stretched thin across the whole room. Mira reached down and placed her small fingers on Kyros's paw. A gentle press. Then, release. Elena smiled. "Perfect." Mira's fingers lingered just a moment longer before returning to her lap. They practiced for nearly 30 minutes. Elena never raised her tone. Mira never used words. But she used everything else. Eyes, breath, the tension in her spine, the distance of her hand from Kyros's fur. And Kyros? He never once broke focus. When she tensed, he leaned in. When she drifted, he nudged her back. By the end, Mira wasn't gripping the leash anymore. She had wrapped it once around her wrist like a bracelet. On the last trial run, Elena stepped behind the prosecutor's table and asked, "Mira, do you remember what the man looked like?" Silence. Kyros shifted slightly, his tail brushing her leg, and Mira, without looking at anyone, pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It was a drawing, one she hadn't shown before. The figure was crude but clear, a tall man, glasses, black SUV, standing near a picket fence. Behind him, a small girl in a purple dress. Elena walked slowly, gently, and accepted the paper with both hands like it was gold leaf. "You're incredibly brave," she whispered. Mira didn't react, but her hand this time didn't tremble when it rested back on Kyros's fur. When they exited the courtroom, Camilla was crying. Lucas knelt to Mira's level and whispered something no one else could hear. Mira didn't speak in return, but she placed her palm on his chest and left it there. Elena watched from a distance, quiet pride softening her shoulders. Then she turned to Kyros, crouched down beside him, and whispered near his ear, "You didn't just help her speak. You reminded her how to be seen." Kyros didn't bark, didn't move, but his tail swept once, just once, across the polished courtroom floor, and somehow it felt like applause. The air in the courtroom felt thicker than usual, weighted with flashbulbs, whispers, and something less tangible: expectation. Every seat was filled. Spectators lined the back walls, shoulder to shoulder. Reporters shifted silently in their chairs, pens poised, eyes fixed on the center aisle. Somewhere outside, news vans hummed with satellite feeds, broadcasting the case that had gripped the nation, the people, Verdorian Pike. But inside the courtroom, it wasn't about headlines anymore. It was about a girl and a dog. Judge Elias Warren entered first, robes still, expression unreadable. His gavel struck once sharp and echoing. "Court is now in session." He paused longer than necessary, maybe for order, maybe for something deeper. "Will the prosecution call their next witness?" Elise Navarro rose, spine straight but face soft. "We call Mira Solis to the stand." A hush swept through the room, quieter than silence. Even the rustle of paper stilled. Then the door at the back opened, and Mira entered. She was small, barely visible behind the broad frame of the bailiff who escorted her, but her presence drew every eye. She wore a simple navy dress, sleeves down to her wrists, a single braid running over one shoulder. Her other hand held the leash. Kyros walked beside her, a silent shadow of purpose. His vest read "Service Dog" in calm lettering, but it might as well have said "Guardian." The moment they stepped into the aisle, something shifted. Not fear. Focus. Camilla, seated in the front row, held Lucas's hand so tightly her knuckles paled. Elena Voss watched from across the aisle, barely breathing. Mira walked slowly, each step placed with care, like she was moving through water. Kyros never broke rhythm. The jury watched them like witnesses to something sacred. She reached the stand. The bailiff leaned in gently. "Do you promise to tell the truth, in whatever way you can?" Mira looked up, eyes wide but steady, and nodded. Once. She sat, shoulders rigid, the leash still looped around her wrist like a lifeline. Kyros settled beside her, half under the bench, half beside her leg. He leaned just enough to touch her ankle with his side. She exhaled, not quite a breath, more like surrender. Elise Navarro approached slowly. "Hi, Mira," she said, keeping her voice low and kind. "It's good to see you again." No answer, no reaction. That was okay. We know you've been through something very hard, Elise continued, and we're so proud of you for being here. Mira blinked once. And I want to ask you some questions, she said, but you don't have to say a word. You can just use your hands, or Kyros. The jury leaned in imperceptibly. Elise moved to the easel beside the stand and flipped to a photo, a driver's license. Dorian Pike's. Mira, she asked gently, do you know this man? Silence. Mira's left hand moved, slowly, deliberately. She reached across her lap and touched Kyros's paw. A low murmur spread through the room like a wave striking marble. The judge tapped his gavel once, not harshly, but enough. Elise nodded. Thank you, Mira. She flipped to a second image. A street. The black SUV, the white fence, a red flower blooming from the grass. Do you remember this place? Another pause. Then Mira nodded small, but firm. Elise hesitated, gauging her next step. Then, was the man in the photo the one who tried to take you? This time Mira didn't move, but Kyros did. He leaned further into her leg, and she, almost without thinking, rested her palm on his back. And then she raised her right hand. She drew a small circle in the air. Twice. The gesture had been taught in practice. 2 circles meant yes. Elise swallowed. That's all I need for now. She stepped back. The defense attorney rose, and the mood changed. Mira's eyes flicked toward the movement. Kyros lifted his head slightly. Miss Solis, the attorney began, voice a little too polished. I understand you've been through a terrible ordeal, but I need to make sure the jury isn't being influenced unfairly. He turned toward Judge Warren. Your Honor, I move to question the role of this service animal as it relates to emotional suggestion. Objection? Navarro cut in. Sustained, Judge Warren said, not even looking up from his notes. You may proceed with questions. Mind your tone. The defense attorney turned back to Mira. You didn't speak to the police, not once. Why should we believe your signals now? Kyros shifted. A low, nearly inaudible rumble passed through his chest. Mira didn't flinch, didn't look at the man. Instead, she turned toward the jury box just for a second and raised her hand again. 2 circles. Then her fingers dropped and found Kyros's fur. No one spoke. Even the air waited. And in that pause thick with emotion and gravity, something changed in the room. She wasn't just a traumatized child anymore. She was a witness, a truth-bearer, and she had never needed words to be believed. Judge Warren cleared his throat. That will be all for now. The gavel struck once. All rise. The courtroom settled again, but not completely. The moment lingered. Mira still sat in the witness box. Kyros curled close to her side like an anchor forged from muscle and memory. His ears were alert but relaxed, his tail still. The leash remained looped around Mira's wrist, not as restraint but as reassurance. It was not just nylon and metal. It was the thread between survival and voice. Judge Warren gave a soft nod to the prosecution. Miss Navarro, you may continue. Elise stood slowly. Her heels clicked once on the wood, then fell silent as she neared the stand again. She didn't carry papers, no notes, just one photograph in a transparent sleeve. She paused beside Mira, but didn't speak right away. She let the silence breathe, because sometimes silence isn't absence, it's preparation. Finally, she knelt just enough to be eye level with Mira. I want to show you a few more images, she said, voice like wind across still water. "You don't have to speak. You already taught us how to listen." She lifted the photo. It was Dorian Pike again this time, a still frame from a security camera. His back was turned. He was walking past a playground. Elise watched Mira's face. Nothing. She moved to the next. Pike smiling at a school career day event. His eyes crinkled. Nothing sinister. Just a man with a badge sticker that read, "Visitor." Mira blinked once, then reached forward tentative but certain and tapped the bottom corner of the photo. Twice. Elise turned the photo. Behind Pike, blurred, barely visible, was the red slide from Mira's elementary school. The jury leaned forward. Kyros didn't move. He didn't have to. "Thank you, Mira," Elise said gently, and stepped back. She turned to the judge. "The prosecution rests for now." Judge Warren gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Defense?" The lead defense attorney rose. Crisp suit, steel-rimmed glasses, every movement a performance. He approached the witness stand like Mira was something delicate and unpredictable, an artifact behind glass. "Miss Solis," he began, then stopped. Her eyes didn't meet his. They focused instead on the gentle rise and fall of Kyros's flank. The defense attorney pressed on. "You've identified my client using gestures and drawings," he said. "But how do we know your memory is accurate? You were frightened, distracted, emotional." No reaction. He stepped closer. "You never saw his license plate, did you?" Mira didn't blink. Kyros lifted his head just slightly. The man smiled, but it was thin. "No offense, young lady, but children get confused. Faces blend. Memories blur. Wouldn't you agree?" Still nothing. He leaned forward. Kyros growled. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. A low, grounded hum rolled from deep in the dog's chest. Controlled, measured, but filled with something ancient and absolute. The bailiff moved. The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Connolly, I'd advise you not to escalate," Warren said sharply. "I'm simply trying to clarify, Your Honor." "No, sir. You're trying to shake a child," Judge Warren replied, "and you're failing." The courtroom didn't applaud, but the silence swelled with approval. The defense attorney stepped back, face tightening. "No further questions." Mira's hand drifted to Kyros's ear, smoothing it once. A motion unconscious, maternal almost. She whispered nothing, just breathed out slowly, her first visible breath since taking the stand. The judge leaned forward. "Mira," he said, voice gentler than anyone had ever heard him speak. "Would you like to leave the stand now?" She didn't answer. She just looked at Kyros. The dog stood. Together, they stepped down, and the courtroom exhaled. Outside, the air had shifted. Inside, something unshakable had taken root. A girl who had every reason to stay silent had spoken in a way no one could misinterpret. The courtroom had fallen into a rhythm by late afternoon. Routine testimonies, repeated objections, scribbled jury notes, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. For the first time in days, there was something that almost resembled normal. Almost. Mira had been excused, resting now in a quiet room nearby, Kyros at her feet like a silent sentinel. But at the judge's request, the dog had returned, briefly, allowed back in as a comfort presence for the next segment of witness testimony. It was a courtesy, the courtroom was told, but it felt more like an omen. Officer Mateo Martinez entered from the side doors, clipboard in hand, patrol uniform pressed but worn at the edges. He looked tired in a way no sleep could fix. He made it halfway to the stand when it happened. Kyros stirred. No bark, no lunge, just a sound, low, gut deep. A growl so subtle most wouldn't have noticed if they weren't watching him. But they were. Because in that room, Kyros was more than just a dog. He was the one constant everyone trusted. The defense shifted uncomfortably. Elise Navarro froze mid-note. But it was Officer Martinez who stopped cold, his boots halting mid-stride as if the floor had vanished. His eyes fell on Kyros, then Pike, then back again. He didn't speak. He just stared, like he was seeing two ghosts stitched together in the same room. Judge Warren noticed. "Officer Martinez, is there a problem?" Martinez didn't answer at first. Instead, he slowly approached the stand. His voice, when it finally arrived, sounded cracked at the edges. "Your Honor, before I begin, may I ask the name of the service dog present?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "Kyros. He's accompanying the witness per court order." Martinez nodded, but his eyes didn't leave Kyros. He crouched just slightly, just enough to look into the dog's face. He didn't reach out, didn't speak, just waited. Kyros tilted his head, sniffed once, and then he did something no one expected. He nudged Martinez's knee with his nose, soft, familiar, and then he wagged his tail, twice. Martinez's face broke like glass under pressure. A single word slipped past his lips, not loud, not certain, just a breath. "Ranger?" Elise's head snapped up. The judge leaned forward, even Pike sitting with artificial calm, visibly tensed. Martinez stood now, fully turned from the witness box. "Sir," he said, addressing the judge, "I need to amend my testimony timeline, because if this is the dog I think it is, then this case doesn't begin with Mira Solis." He looked over to Elise. "It begins with a suspect we never caught, a case that went cold 3 years ago. The name wasn't Pike then, but the face," he turned slowly toward the defense table, "is the same." Dorian Pike didn't flinch, but Kyros growled again, this time quieter, as if saying, "I remember." The courtroom air had changed. Even as court adjourned for the day, the walls seemed to carry a different weight, like something long buried had been disturbed beneath the floorboards. Detective Elise Navarro walked out with her notes pressed tight to her chest. Judge Warren lingered behind the bench, brows furrowed in silent deliberation. But Officer Mateo Martinez didn't leave. He stayed. On the bench near the rear, next to the service hallway where Kyros sat at his feet. Still, watchful, like always. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was familiar, like old shoes, old wounds. Martinez stared down at the shepherd. "They said you didn't make it." His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "They told me you bled out before the paramedics arrived, that you were buried." Kyros blinked slowly, tilted his head. Then, in a movement too intentional to be instinct, he raised his paw, rested it against Martinez's boot. Martinez couldn't stop it. The memory. It came back in pieces, jagged like broken glass. 3 years ago, a gray house at the end of Blanchard Street. A call about a missing toddler. Neighbors heard screaming in the basement. Martinez had kicked the door in first, Ranger on his heels, the stench of mildew and bleach. The child, 4 years old, eyes wide with panic, locked behind an unfinished wall. And the suspect, gone, fled through the rear. Ranger had gone after him without hesitation, down the alley, over a fence. The next thing Martinez remembered was the radio squawking, "K9 down." He hadn't seen his partner since that day. He was told it was over, that the dog had died on the table before they could stop the bleeding. They gave him a folded flag and a collar, said he did good, said it was enough. It never was. Martinez rubbed his face, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of this moment. "You were chasing someone who hurt a kid," he whispered. "You almost died trying to stop him. And now, 3 years later, you growl at the man in that courtroom like you never forgot his scent." Kyros said nothing, but he didn't need to. His presence was the answer. Dr. Elena Voss stepped in quietly, giving them space at first. "I thought you should know," she said gently. "He was found half alive in a field outside county lines. No microchip, severe internal bleeding, torn flank. Whoever dumped him didn't even look back." Martinez turned toward her, eyes hollow. "And you saved him?" "I tried," she said. "But it was Mira who finished what I started. She gave him purpose again." Martinez swallowed the guilt like broken glass. He knelt beside the dog, no longer Ranger, not exactly, but not a stranger either. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice raw now. "You shouldn't have been left behind. You were more than a partner. You were—" His throat tightened. Kyros leaned forward, nose to Martinez's chest, pressing gently, and for a moment the officer simply closed his eyes and let himself feel the gravity of what had been returned to him. A chance, a truth, a bond that death had not severed, because death, it turned out, never happened. When Martinez rose again, something had shifted in him. The grief didn't vanish, but it no longer felt like it ruled him. "I need to reopen the file," he said quietly to Elena, "the one from 3 years ago. The basement. The kid. That perp had no name, but if Ranger—" Kyros growled at Pike. He trailed off, but they both knew what it meant. This wasn't the first time Dorian Pike had hurt a child, and it might not have been the last, if not for a dog who refused to forget. The courtroom didn't breathe. For once the murmurs were gone. The rustle of notepads, the polite coughs, the shifting of bodies in rigid pews, all silenced by the tension hanging in the air. Detective Mateo Martinez took the stand. He didn't adjust his tie, didn't clear his throat. His posture wasn't dramatic. But in the way he placed his hands, flat, deliberate, anchored, it was clear this wasn't just testimony, it was a reckoning. "I recognize the defendant," Martinez said, "Dorian Pike." "From this investigation?" Prosecutor Elise Navarro asked. "No, ma'am," he said. "From a case 3 years ago. A missing child in the Blanchard district. I was first on scene with my canine partner." He didn't look at Pike. He didn't need to. But Kyros, lying in the aisle beside Mira, lifted his head. His ears twitched. Navarro leaned forward. "And what connection are you about to establish, detective?" Martinez let the words fall like hammer strikes. "Same type of victim, same pattern of surveillance, same staged distractions, same bleach odor, same ventilation pipe entry in the basement." A gasp rippled through the audience. On the defense bench, Pike shifted for the first time all day. His lawyer whispered something. He didn't reply. Martinez continued, his voice steady. "The suspect in the Blanchard case was never identified, but we found evidence of grooming emails under aliases, photos taken weeks before abduction attempts. The child was locked in a hidden wall space, left with headphones blasting static." He paused, jaw tight. Then, the garage in Pike's property, the soundproofing matches what we found at Blanchard. Elise let the silence stretch, then walked slowly toward the jury. Were any charges filed then, Detective? No. We had no name, only a partial composite, which now matches Pike's DMV photo. She pulled up a screen. Side by side, a blurry courtroom sketch from 3 years ago, and Pike's driver's license. Same jawline, same narrow eyes, same hesitation in the stare like a man who mimics normalcy but never lives it. "You believe," Navarro said, voice low, "that the same man attempted abduction years ago and returned again?" "I do," Martinez said. "He escalated, from hiding children to potentially eliminating them." Kyros let out the softest chuff from the floor. Not a growl, not a warning, an acknowledgement. The jury leaned in, one by one. An older woman covered her mouth. A younger man wiped his eyes. A father of 2 noted earlier in voir dire gripped the edge of his seat so tightly his knuckles paled. Judge Elias Warren didn't interrupt, because deep inside, behind the rigid gavel and years of legal armor, something had begun to crack, something personal. When Navarro stepped back, she nodded to the technician. A file displayed on the screen. Cold Case 04228B. Victim, Olivia Sandler, age 4. Status, recovered. Suspect, unnamed. Next to it, Cold Case 04229C. Victim, Jennifer Banks, age 7. Status, missing. Suspect, unknown. Location 9 miles from Blanchard site. "This pattern isn't isolated," Navarro said. "It's methodical, clinical, practiced, and it leads here today." The defense rose. "Your Honor, objection. This is speculation built on a reopened case that was closed for lack of evidence." Judge Warren didn't flinch. "Overruled." His voice was quiet, but final. "You'll have time for cross." Outside, the wind knocked dry leaves against the courthouse glass. Inside, Mira sat on the front bench, her hand resting quietly on Kyros's neck. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. Not this time, because truth, when spoken aloud, changes the air, and even a child can feel it, even a child who stopped speaking. When Martinez stepped down, he passed close to the defense table. For a brief second, Pike looked up, their eyes locked. It was the faintest flicker, but something passed between them. Recognition. Fear. And just before the bailiff called recess, Kyros stood, still silent, still composed, but his stare laser-focused on Pike spoke volumes. He remembered everything. The courtroom emptied slowly after recess was called, but Judge Elias Warren remained seated. His fingers rested on the edge of the bench, unmoving, as though the grain of the wood could steady the storm rising behind his ribs. Outside, the sky had begun to dim, and slivers of dusk cut through the stained glass above him, amber and gold catching dust motes like suspended memories. He didn't hear the clerk call his name twice. "Your Honor?" He finally blinked. "Call a sealed chamber. Now. Defense, prosecution, Martinez. Bring that child psychologist Voss." His voice didn't rise, but it had that tone, the one that meant this isn't optional. In his chambers, the air was heavier. Less courtroom, more confession box. No press, no jury, just truth, whether it wanted to show itself or not. Elias stood beside the shelf of old files, but his eyes weren't scanning case law. They were fixed on a framed photo tucked behind a row of legal volumes, one he hadn't touched in over a decade. The photo was slightly faded, a group of first graders at a school science fair, pipe cleaner robots, painted planets, gummy worm experiments, and in the back corner, a man adjusting a projector. It, volunteer, Dorian Pike, standing 2 feet from Elias's daughter, Caroline. She'd gone missing 3 months later. "I want a full inquiry into Pike's volunteer history," Judge Warren said, voice tight. "Not just schools, after-school programs, public libraries, anywhere with access to children." Navarro glanced at him, startled. "Your Honor, do you have personal involvement?" "I am making a request," he said, sharp now. "Not recusing, not grandstanding. I'm asking if this court is about justice or convenience." No one answered, but the silence agreed with him. Detective Martinez shifted in his chair. "I can make calls. There's a retired officer I trust. He worked cold cases back then. If Pike's name shows up in any of his notes, we'll find it." Elena Voss, quiet until now, spoke gently. "Judge Warren, if that photo is real and Pike was around your daughter—" He turned, and for the first time since the trial began, the weight in his eyes wasn't legal. It was paternal. "He was there," Elias said. "I remember now. At parent-teacher night, he offered to fix the projector. My wife thought he was polite, harmless." His jaw clenched. "I was the one who signed the background check waiver." For a long time, nobody spoke. Kyros, resting at Mira's feet, let out a small breath, ears relaxed but alert, like he could sense it, the way grief can thicken a room without raising its voice. Then the judge's tone shifted, measured again, controlled, but not cold. "I need to know what happens if the defendant is part of something larger. If we pursue this now, we may find dozens of families with missing pieces. Or," he looked down, "we may find no one wants to open graves that never got names." Elise Navarro answered first. "We open them," she said simply. "Even if all we find is silence, we open them." Elias nodded once, then picked up the photo and turned it over. A post-it, yellowed and curling, was still stuck to the back. In his own handwriting, "Caroline Saturn, so proud of her." Dated 2 weeks before she vanished. His voice, when it came, sounded like a man sifting through ashes for one last ember. "My daughter loved Saturn because she said the rings looked like arms that could hold you, not trap you. Just hold you." Kyros stirred. Mira, seated beside him, looked up at the judge. She didn't speak, but she held up one finger, then gently pressed it to Kyros's paw. It was the signal Voss had trained her to give when something hurt. But she still wanted to stay. The room stilled again. The judge took a breath that wasn't quite steady. Then, "This chamber is now sealed under subsection 24B. No transcripts, no recordings. Officially, this conversation didn't happen." He looked to Navarro. "You have my authorization to follow the trail, quietly, but completely." Then his eyes dropped once more to the photo in his hand. "And if he was involved in Caroline's disappearance?" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Outside, thunder rumbled like distant drums. Inside, a long-forgotten case had just cracked open. And in the center of it all, one little girl who couldn't speak, one dog who didn't need her to, and one father in robes who finally remembered. The backyard of Dorian Pike's home didn't look like much. A patchy lawn, crooked bird bath, a leaning shed. But Kyros didn't care about appearances. His nose worked before his paws hit soil. The search warrant came at dawn. Martinez led the unit, crouching beside Kyros. "You ready, partner?" Kyros didn't bark. He walked, straight to the garden bed where lilies used to grow. A crime tech held up a sealed bag, a small red hoodie Mira had drawn 2 days ago. Kyros, given the scent, stiffened and led them to a spot by overturned pots. He sat, pawed once, and stared. Forensics scanned the soil, something hollow beneath. By noon, they found the hidden door behind ivy, padlocked from the inside. Bolt cutters opened it. A narrow stair led down. Martinez first. Kyros followed, silent, sure-footed, unafraid. At the bottom, a chamber, wrong, a mattress, toys, photos of children. And in the center, what Mira had drawn, a dark corridor, a man's shadow. Kyros froze, walked forward, stopped at a shelf where a leather collar sat, burned initials, ELI. When Martinez reached for it, Kyros growled low, final. A diary page read, "Don't let them forget our names." Upstairs, Mira, waiting, picked up a crayon and drew, a buried door, a leash hanging from the frame. Later, they uncovered more. Toys, lockets, drawings of a man with no eyes, a leash in his hand. Email chains revealed Pike had used school networks to get close to children. A note. They trust what's quiet. They follow what doesn't bark. Kyros pressed his nose to a drawing of the scribbled man labeled ELI. He let out a breath, almost a sigh, and sat. Martinez rested a hand on his back. "You remembered, and you brought us back." That night Mira stirred. Asleep, clutching her bear, she whispered, "The cave, blue shoes, under the ladder." Camila froze, details only visible in the chamber. Elena later said, "Maybe she saw it in dreams, or felt it." Mira began drawing again. The locket, Kyros at the ladder, blue shoes under steps. When asked if she'd seen the cave, she whispered, "I dreamed it." In therapy, she described a man's glove with a hole in the finger, a detail never made public. Martinez listened to the recording. "She didn't just survive," he said. "She remembered." Hale nodded. "Like Kyros did." Martinez leaned back. "This isn't just evidence. It's memory. And maybe she's the map." That evening, Mira placed her hand on Kyros's back in the yard. "He never left me," she said. Camilla asked gently, "Who?" Mira looked at Kyros. "The dog in the dark, the one who didn't bark. He stayed." And at last, her voice carried the weight of truth. "I wasn't alone." The photo slipped from Lucas's hand, landing face up on the coffee table. 2 boys grinned back from it, missing teeth, arms around each other. One was Lucas. The other was Dorian Pike. Camilla's voice broke the silence. "What is this?" Lucas stared at the picture. "I didn't recognize him at first. He looked so different on the news. Older. Cold." "You knew him," she said, tight with disbelief. "He was my uncle's kid. I haven't seen him since we were 12. The room went quiet. Elena Voss, standing nearby, hesitated to speak. Kyros lay at Mira's feet, still and watchful. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Camilla asked. "I didn't remember. Not until now." That night, after Lucas stepped out for air, Camilla tucked Mira into bed. The child seemed distant, gaze far away. Then Mira spoke. "He used to stand by the fence, wore a hat, took pictures when you weren't home." Camilla froze. "When was this?" Mira pointed to her long-abandoned stuffed bunny. "I showed Bunny once. He saw me and walked away." Downstairs, Mira quietly drew a man in black by their fence, a camera hanging like a weapon. Behind him, their house and a small girl sat unaware. Elena whispered, "He'd been around long before." Lucas paled. "That can't be." "And yet it is," Camilla said. Mira later showed another drawing, a large dog, faceless children, and a figure in red shoes. "Before summer," she said. She'd seen Pike for months, and no one knew. Alone, Lucas sat on the bed, face in his hands. Kyros entered, resting his head on Lucas's knee. The dog's silent presence spoke louder than words. In her room, Camilla brushed Mira's hair. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't want you to be scared," Mira whispered. "Honey, I need to know to protect you. Kyros protected me. Every time." Pike, in cuffs, sat across from Prosecutor Navarro, calm, almost smug. "I'll take life without parole federal facility." "You don't get to choose comfort," Navarro shot back. "I'll give you bodies. But there's one girl. She might still be alive." He described Bug, a girl with a green dragon plush who once escaped him. Maybe survived. Outside, news spread fast. Mira Hayes breaks silence, helps identify suspect. Serial predator pleads guilty, hints one may be alive. Former K-9 alerts on new evidence. A photo showed Kyros alerting on a dusty backpack. Inside, a green dragon plush clutched in a tiny pink glove. Granted an emergency warrant, the team combed Pike's old property. Kyros led them toward a long-abandoned ranger station. Mira, having snuck into her father's car, spotted the first clue, a red shoelace caught on a thorn bush. She held it wordlessly. Kyros barked once, signaling hope. Hale studied old maps, tracing forgotten tunnels. He pointed to an old water conduit. "If she's anywhere, it's here." Kyros stood, ready. Near midnight, at a cabin deep in the woods, Kyros froze, ears pricked. A faint cough came from inside. Officers breached the door. Inside, they found a child malnourished, bruised, curled behind a bookshelf. Kyros entered the room, lay down near her, guarding the door. The girl reached out. Her fingers touched his fur, finding comfort in his steady presence. Her name was Emma Reyes, 8 years old, missing 247 days. The cabin's decor matched Pike's lair. Emma was one of the others. At the hospital, Kyros stayed by Emma's cot, unmoving. Mira joined her, drawing 2 girls holding hands beside a big dog. Emma, silent so long, pointed at the picture and whispered, "Bug." Outside, reporters clamored for the story. But inside, healing began, in shared quiet between 2 broken girls and a dog who never quit. Navarro turned to Hale. "We have proof. Pike's done." Hale nodded. And in that quiet hospital room, Kyros kept watch as Emma, once lost in shadows, began to breathe freely again. The evidence team moved slowly, careful not to disturb the integrity of the site beneath Pike's property. It was no longer just a crime scene, it was a graveyard of memories. And not all of them were from this year. Inside the plastic storage container recovered from the far wall of the hidden chamber, buried beneath yellowed sketches and brittle strands of hair, was a child's canvas backpack. Pink, threadbare, one zipper broken, but on the inner flap, still faintly legible in smudged ink, Jennifer Banks. Room 2A. Hawthorne Elementary Detective Hale stood over the evidence table, jaw tight. "That name hasn't come up before," he said. Navarro frowned. "Because it's old. Very old." 10 years. No body ever found. Case cold since 2015. But as the tag was read aloud, Kyros, quiet since the search began, lifted his head. His body stiffened. He moved to the table edge and let out one soft chuff, then another, and then, nose low, he pawed at the table leg. "Elena," Hale said urgently. Dr. Voss stepped forward. Kyros circled the bag once, then pressed his forehead gently against it, then sat. Still. Watching. A signal. Not scent. Memory. Dogs didn't forget. Not real ones. Not like Kyros. That evening the file was pulled from archives. Photos faded by time. A family torn open, never sealed shut. Jennifer Banks. Age 6. Last seen, October 14, 2015. Status, presumed deceased. Primary suspect, unknown. No witnesses, no evidence. But one detail hadn't been shared with the public back then. Jennifer had a German shepherd. The parents had said she loved the dog more than her dolls, more than cartoons, more than bedtime stories. The dog's name was Eli. Elijah, the mother corrected once during the interview. She called him her guardian. That name. The collar found in the chamber. The one with Eli scratched into the leather. It wasn't random. It wasn't symbolic. It was real. Navarro's hand shook slightly as she placed the two pieces side by side, the backpack and the collar, both degraded but intact. "They were hers," she whispered. "Both of them." Hale leaned in. "What about the parents?" "Moved to Colorado, divorced. Father passed last year." Navarro swallowed. "But the mother's still alive." Her name was Michelle Banks. They reached her by phone, then in person at a quiet assisted living complex just outside Boulder. Navarro and Hale brought only a copy of the backpack photo and the collar. Nothing else. Michelle answered the door in a cardigan 2 sizes too big, her frame diminished by time and grief. But when the image was placed in her hands, her reaction wasn't loud. She didn't cry. She exhaled. Once. Long. Shaky. And whispered, "I told them. I told them she didn't just disappear." When Navarro explained that a new lead had surfaced, connected to a suspect currently on trial for multiple child abductions, the woman reached for the chair behind her before her knees buckled. "My daughter's dog," she whispered, fingers trembling over the photo. "He was never found either. We thought maybe he got away, but he wouldn't have left her." "No," Hale said softly. "He wouldn't." They told her what they could. That there was no confirmed body. That there were drawings, personal effects, but no remains. And that a police dog, a retired K9 named Kyros, had reacted strongly to her daughter's name. Michelle's voice cracked. "Do you think he remembers her?" Navarro didn't answer. But she didn't have to. Because sometimes silence was mercy. Back in Oak Hollow, Mira sat with her sketchbook again. Kyros curled beside her on the porch, watching fireflies blink through the dusk. She didn't draw herself today, or even Emma. She drew a girl she'd never met, small, smiling, wearing a backpack with a single missing zipper and a big dog beside her, tail curled gently around her. In the corner of the page, Mira printed one name, Jennifer. Later that night, as Kyros rested at the foot of Lucas' bed, he stirred. A twitch in the paw, a low exhale. In the space between sleep and memory, his ears moved as if catching echoes not heard in years. Perhaps a voice, a cry, a signal, and like all good guardians, he listened. The room was bare, just a table, a recorder, and a man who finally realized he wasn't going home. Dorian Pike sat hunched, cuffs biting into his wrists, sweat drying cold on the back of his neck. His voice no longer carried confidence, just calculation. Detective Hale leaned in, voice quiet but clear. "We found Jennifer's collar." Pause. "You kept it. Why?" Pike didn't answer. Navarro slid a photo across the table of the chamber, the collage of items, names, timelines scrawled in obsessive loops. "You kept them like trophies." Still silence. Then, "She wasn't the only one," Pike muttered. "What did you say?" Hale asked, icy. Pike licked his lips. "You think I'm the storm? I'm not. I'm the forecast. Others three I know, maybe more. We traded information, access. You want names?" He smiled, a pitiful, hungry curl. "Get me off death row." Navarro's eyes narrowed. "You think this buys you mercy?" "I think it buys you time," Pike rasped. "One's in Missouri. One just moved from Colorado. The third, he doesn't use a name anymore, only initials." The task force scrambled by morning, warrants, searches, files unsealed, connections cross-matched. Each tip Pike gave came laced with riddles oblique references to forums, burner emails, coded photographs. But the bones were real. The leads held weight. A sting operation in Jefferson County recovered 3 USB drives and the jacket of a child gone missing in 2021. A Denver storage unit yielded hand-drawn maps and 4 unlabeled flash drives. One held footage too damaging to describe, and in a motel outside Shreveport, police rescued a boy, 7, locked in a soundproof closet, hands bound with a belt marked AC, the initials. It wasn't just Pike. It was a pattern, a network. Back in Oak Hollow, the community center opened its doors to families, those who'd lost children, those still searching, and those holding their babies tighter than ever before. Mira sat on the front row, legs tucked beneath her chair, Kyros beside her like a sentinel. His presence allowed her to be there without crumbling. On stage, a woman named Renee Wallace spoke first. Her daughter, Eva, disappeared from a school bus stop in 2018. No leads, no closure. "I kept setting her place at the table," she said, voice hoarse. "Every dinner, just in case." A man in uniform followed. Sergeant Nguyen, who'd found the boy in Shreveport. "I've done this job 16 years, he said, eyes glinting. "I've seen war zones look more humane than what we saw last night. But he's safe now. That boy's safe." Then came Elena Voss, not as a therapist, but as someone who'd trained with Kyros before he was injured, back when he was still Ranger. She faced the room, then looked to Mira. "When trauma silences a voice, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is listen anyway. That's what Mira taught me, and Kyros, and all of you." Mira didn't speak, but she listened. To every cracked voice, every unfinished sentence, every story interrupted by grief too thick to shape into words. And when it was over, when the room fell quiet and the chairs were slowly emptied, she stood. She walked forward, and for the first time, Mira turned not to Elena or Camilla or even her father. She faced Renee Wallace, stepped close, and held out a drawing. A simple image done in faint strokes, just pencil and crayon, a girl with 2 long braids and a pink shirt, holding the paw of a big, silent dog. At the top corner, in Mira's careful handwriting, "Eva, plus Kyros. He keeps us safe. Renee took it in trembling hands. She covered her mouth and sobbed, not from despair this time, but something else. Something like hope. That night, Lucas stood by Mira's bed as she slept, Kyros curled around her legs. Her sketchbook rested on the pillow beside her. He opened it gently. On the page, dozens of children, some smiling, some with eyes wide and uncertain. And at the center, always, a dog, his fur streaked with age, a faint scar along his flank. Kyros. Always Kyros. Lucas's throat caught, and in the quiet he whispered, "You're not alone anymore. Not them, not her, not him." The courthouse hall still echoed with the quiet aftershock of the trial. But for Elise Navarro, there was no pause, no real finish line. Justice didn't stop with a verdict. It had to reach further, wider. It had to ripple. She sat alone that evening in her office, lights low, blinds tilted just enough for the setting sun to spill across her cluttered desk. Her laptop screen glowed with the blinking cursor of a title she had retyped 5 times, then deleted 4. This time, she didn't backspace. The Mira Solis Act. Her fingers hovered above the keys, then moved with conviction. An act to provide legal allowance for the presence of certified trauma therapy animals in state courtrooms, available to minor or vulnerable witnesses under defined clinical supervision and courtroom discretion. Each word carried weight. Each sentence fought shadows, those that still loomed in the eyes of children like Mira. Mira hadn't spoken during the final sentencing. She hadn't needed to. Her presence, silent, steady beside Kyros, had reshaped what it meant to tell the truth. In rooms designed for facts, she reminded them that truth sometimes needs comfort to surface. The jury never looked at her like a prop. They looked at her like a lighthouse. Elise remembered watching from the prosecution table, hand clenched around her pen, thinking, if we expect children to carry our justice system on their shoulders, the least we can do is let them lean on something warm and living. She exhaled, eyes flicking back to the bill's title. Mira's name didn't just belong there. It deserved to. Within 48 hours, Elise submitted the proposal to state legislators. Accompanied by clinical testimonies, law enforcement endorsements, and footage from Mira's session with Kyros in mock court, the file traveled fast. By week's end, the headlines began to appear. Mira's law? Prosecutor pushes for animal-assisted testimony protections after landmark case. German Shepherd at the center of courtroom revolution. He kept her calm. New bill may allow therapy dogs for trauma witnesses across the country. Within 2 weeks, 14 states responded with interest. 3 introduced mirror drafts in parallel. Social workers, trauma therapists, and public defenders began citing the Mira Solis case in open forums. The American Bar Association requested Elise to present at their summer conference. It wasn't just legislation anymore. It was momentum. At home, Lucas stared at the television as the local news anchor read aloud the proposed bill. Mira sat cross-legged on the carpet, sketching again, Kyros's head resting in her lap. Lucas blinked at the screen. "Do you know what they're calling it?" he asked gently. Mira paused, lifted her eyes. He pointed. "That." She looked at the screen. Her name appeared in bold across the banner, and for the first time Mira didn't flinch at the sound of it. Her fingers moved again, not across her sketchpad, but toward Kyros's ear. She rubbed softly. "I didn't do it alone," she whispered. Lucas smiled, half broken, half whole. "No one ever does." The day the bill passed in their home state, Elise Navarro stood on the Capitol steps, wind lifting the edge of her suit jacket. A dozen cameras clicked. Beside her, Elena Voss held Kyros's leash, and between them, in a simple blue dress with braids behind her shoulders, stood Mira. Not as a victim, but as a voice. The governor shook her hand gently. "Thank you for changing the way we protect children." Mira didn't answer with words. Instead, she leaned down, touched Kyros's shoulder, then reached up and placed her drawing into the governor's hand, a new one, fresh from this morning. A picture of a courtroom filled with light, no shadows. At the center, a child and a dog. And under it, in Mira's neat handwriting, "Sometimes safety wears fur." They said the sentence would be procedural, formal, predictable. But when evil is named aloud and bound by law, when a face that haunted the corners of too many childhood memories is finally stripped of silence and walked toward consequence, nothing about it feels ordinary. Inside the courtroom, the air was too still, as if even the walls were listening. The bailiff called the room to order one final time. "All rise." Everyone did, even Mira. She stood quietly, hand clutching the worn leather handle of Kyros's leash. The German shepherd rose with her, calm as ever, his posture alert, noble, as if he, too, knew justice was about to speak. Dorian Pike sat shackled, head slightly bowed, not in humility, but in the resigned arrogance of a man who finally had nothing left to control. No plea, no loophole, no secret door. The judge's voice echoed, "Mr. Pike, this court finds you guilty on all counts: child endangerment, unlawful confinement, aggravated assault on minors, and conspiracy to commit serial abduction." His gavel paused mid-air. "And in accordance with both state and federal sentencing guidelines, you are hereby sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. No possibility of parole, no appeal shall be considered." The gavel fell like thunder. One clean strike, not just a sound, but a closing. Gasps and stifled sobs rippled through the benches. Journalists stopped typing. Even the hum of camera shutters seemed to falter. And still Mira didn't move, but her eyes never left Pike, not in vengeance, not in fear, just clarity. She had once been too small to fight back, too scared to scream, too silenced by trauma to point a finger. Now she didn't have to scream. Justice had spoken for her. Kyros shifted beside her, brushing his body gently against her legs. It was the same motion he'd done that very first night, the night of nightmares and shadows and no words. Mira reached down, fingers sliding into the thick fur behind his ear. She gave a quiet rub. Kyros leaned into it, and though she didn't speak, her lips moved silently. "Thank you." From across the aisle, Lucas stood with his hands clasped tightly, chest rising with restrained emotion. Behind him, Elena Voss sat blinking rapidly, holding a folded tissue in one hand, and Kyros's medical file in the other, the one she had refused to close until now. Detective Ramon Hale gave a small nod. He had seen justice in many forms, but nothing like this. And near the front row, Judge Elias Warren. His voice, firm a moment ago, now seemed heavier, older. He stared at the man who had once volunteered at his daughter's school, who had posed for photos during spring cleanup day, who had smiled like any other father. Only now did Elias let himself glance down. In his breast pocket was a photo. A girl in a yellow jacket, her grin lopsided. He never brought it to court before. Today, he needed to. He placed it face down on the bench and exhaled. Outside, the press scrambled for statements. Microphones crowded near doors. Commentators debated the case's national impact, the seismic shift in child witness policy, the role of therapy animals. But Mira didn't hear any of it. She and Kyros walked silently through the side exit, hand on leash, step in sync. No guards, no cameras, just them. The light outside was soft, almost gold. She stopped under a sycamore tree near the courthouse lawn, looked up at its leaves, then turned to Kyros. He sat, looked back at her. She knelt beside him slowly, hugged his thick frame nose buried in his neck. For a long moment she stayed there, breathing him in, the warmth, the smell of safety. And then, "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. Kyros thumped his tail once, as if he'd been waiting to hear her say that. The wind smelled like sage and sun-warmed soil. In the hills, just past the city's noise, the therapy ranch sat quiet, an old homestead repurposed into a sanctuary. There were horses with patient eyes, trees that cast forgiving shadows, and open skies that didn't press down but lifted. This wasn't a place built to erase the past. It was a place designed to hold it gently until it no longer hurt. That morning, 3 girls stood at the edge of the paddock, none of them speaking first. Mira had grown taller, not much, but enough that her sleeves no longer swallowed her hands. Her posture was straighter, the leash in her grip was steady. Kyros sat beside her, ears forward, eyes sweeping the perimeter like always. Emma Reyes stood a step behind her, arms crossed loosely over her chest. Her face was thinner than before. 8 months in that cabin had taken something from her body, but not from her spirit. Not entirely. A blue scrunchie held her hair in a high ponytail, and when she saw the horses, she smiled for the first time in weeks. Jennifer Banks wore mismatched socks and a sweatshirt with holes at both elbows. She had been missing the longest. 10 years was enough time for memory to turn into myth, for maybe she's alive, to become we shouldn't hope. But here she was, 14 now, skittish, brilliant. Her journal never left her grip. Kyros moved first. He didn't sniff, didn't bound. He just walked, deliberate, measured toward Jennifer. She froze, notebook clutched. But Kyros stopped at a careful distance, dropped into a down position, and waited. Jennifer looked at Mira. Mira nodded, and Jennifer crouched. Kyros let her touch his paw. They weren't friends, not yet. They didn't trade secrets over lunch or run laughing through fields. But when Jennifer flinched at a sudden noise, Emma stepped closer. Just enough. When Mira had trouble sleeping, it was Emma's flashlight that blinked twice from the bunk below, and when Emma couldn't speak in group circle time, Jennifer passed her the notepad. The bond wasn't built with noise. It was built in glances, in side-by-side silence, in shared knowledge of what it meant to disappear and come back different. Dr. Elena Voss visited twice a week. She never pushed, just brought gentle tools games with no rules, paints with no lines, and dogs who didn't bark unless invited. Kyros had a new role now, not just Mira's anchor, but a roaming shadow of safety for all 3 girls. He rotated bunkhouses, laying beside Emma when she refused to eat, nudging Jennifer when her hands trembled from holding a pencil too tight. One night, Jennifer whispered it for the first time. "I remember the collar." Emma looked over. "The one in the photos?" Jennifer nodded. "It was mine, before I forgot my name." Mira didn't speak. She just scooted closer on the bed, her foot barely brushing Jennifer's. Kyros shifted, his body curling across their feet. No one cried. They didn't need to. A week later, the girls were asked to write one word on a stone. One thing they wanted to leave behind. Mira picked small. Emma picked night. Jennifer picked vanish. They placed their stones at the base of the sycamore tree near the barn, the one with roots too stubborn to die, even when the soil cracked in summer. That afternoon they rode horses together. 3 silhouettes against the sun. 3 survivors, not of the same crime, but of the same silence. Later, Lucas came to visit. He brought Mira a sketchbook with her name stitched into the cover. She handed him a drawing. No words. Just 3 girls under a wide sky, and a dog whose eyes seemed to hold it all together. Lucas looked at the drawing, then looked at her. "You okay, kiddo?" Mira thought for a moment, then pointed at the picture, then to her chest, then to Kyros. He smiled. "I get it." And for the first time in forever, she believed him. It was a small gathering. No news cameras, no gavel, no echoing courtroom or sharp suits. Just the breeze, a wooden bench beneath a cottonwood tree, and the hush that only comes when everyone present understands what's sacred. Mira sat in the middle, wearing her best dress blue with little white buttons. She didn't fidget. She didn't hide. She sat still, her hands gently curled around the braided leather leash that had become more than an object. It was memory, anchor, promise. Kyros sat at her feet. The scar down his side had faded to a pale streak, barely visible under his thick coat. But his eyes were the same, quietly alert, endlessly kind. He watched the crowd the way only a dog who'd once been forgotten knew how, with loyalty, not trust. Next to them stood Dr. Elena Voss, holding a manila folder with adoption papers. Lucas holding back tears that had threatened all morning. Emma and Jennifer, hands clasped tight. Even Detective Hale showed up, tie crooked, posture unsure, like he still didn't know how to stand when justice had actually won. The plaque hadn't been revealed yet, but Mira knew the words by heart. Elena cleared her throat the way she always did before speaking into emotion. "We gather today not to end something," she began, voice calm but warm, "but to affirm it." She looked at Mira. "Some partnerships are made with contracts, some with commands, but this one was made with silence and survived everything." Mira didn't blink. She just reached down, and Kyros lifted his paw into her palm like they'd practiced. Not a trick, a ritual. Elena handed her the final form. Mira took the pen. Lucas held his breath. She signed. Every letter steady. M-I-R-A. The crowd clapped, softly, respectfully. Then came the final moment. Elena stepped to the plaque beneath the tree and pulled away the cover. He didn't need words. He only needed her. "In honor of Kyros, therapy dog, guardian, survivor." Mira stared at the words, then down at Kyros. Then she spoke. Only 3 words, but this time they were hers. "Let's go home." No one said anything right away, but Lucas dropped to one knee beside her and pressed his forehead to Kyros's neck. Jennifer sniffled. Emma whispered something into her palm. "And Kyros?" He stood up, tail wagging once, like a promise kept. On the ride back, Mira held the leash in her lap, not like a rope, but like a ribbon threaded through everything they'd been through. Her thumb brushed over its worn edge. a symbol of every night he had stayed, every scream he had silenced, every truth he had heard before she could even speak it. In the back seat, Elena smiled at the two of them. "You know," she said softly, "some people get guide dogs for their eyes, some for their balance, some for their heart." Mira looked at her, then looked at Kyros, and for the first time answered without hesitation. "Mine listens to my voice." Later that evening, under the golden haze of the ranch sunset, Kyros lay curled at Mira's side while she sketched. Not nightmares this time, not shadows or screams, just a girl, a dog, and a house with a porch swing, and above them 3 small stars. Emma, Jennifer, Mira. They didn't just survive. They learned how to live again, together. In a world where pain often silences the most vulnerable, sometimes healing doesn't begin with words. It begins with a paw gently placed in a trembling hand. Mira and Kyros showed us that trust can be rebuilt not through speeches, but through shared silence, steady presence, and unwavering loyalty. This story is more than just the journey of a child and a retired canine. It is a tribute to the quiet heroes, 4-legged and 2-legged, who refuse to give up even when the world turns away. German shepherds, like Kyros, remind us that strength comes in many forms, in stillness, in instinct, in love that never demands but always protects. The Mira Solis Act, born from their courage, is a reminder that compassion can be written into law, and that even the smallest voice, when heard, can change everything. May this story remind us to see the invisible, listen to the quiet, and fight for those who cannot yet speak. And may we all remember, sometimes the strongest bonds aren't spoken, they're lived. One step, one heartbeat, one soft paw print at a time. Because sometimes it only takes one dog to save a life and one girl to remind us why it matters.